Welcome back to another episode of Being Human with Chris Walker, a podcast about just that, being human. How can we be a little more the human that we want to be and maybe a little less the human being that we were told that we were supposed to be? Today, we are talking about Juneteenth, a celebration which maybe has come into an understanding, into the media, into kind of somewhat of a spotlight in more recent years, but it is a celebration of what happened on June 19th, 1965, which is not the end of slavery. It is not the emancipation. It is not the 13th Amendment being passed. It is a time in which the National Army or the Federal Army actually had to bring its troops into Texas to demand/force the freedom of the slaves in, I believe it was Galveston, Texas. So why that's important? To start off, it is to realize that 1965 was not that long ago. But then it's to think about a mindset in which a country was founded on. A mindset that started off as a set of colonies from England that thrived, that the economy was created through slave labor. And this is not in that comment to say a right or wrong thing. That is just to state a fact. A fact that the owning of another human and the exploitation of that human being's labor created a economic boom. And that economy that was created then turned into the economy that was the foundation of the United States of America. And when we begin to think about 1965, one, not being that long ago, two, what has changed since then? The answer is a lot and not a lot at the exact same time. So to have a mindset that says you have a certain color of a skin and I'm going to look down upon you because it has been deemed okay for people of my color of skin to own the people of your color of skin. So you have been dehumanized. The partial humanization of that was only made when the 3/5 law was created, where each slave counted as 3/5 of a person because the southern states were upset because the northern states were getting more political clout than them. So this power struggle was, we want to own people because they help our businesses make money, and we can't figure out how to be economically successful without them. But at the exact same time, we don't want them to have rights, but we want to get the value of them. And this is just the concept of what it must have been like looking back at if the winners didn't share, or if the winners don't write history. Because the winners writing history makes us think Abraham Lincoln was a righteous man and he thought all men should be created equal and slavery is bad. The reality of it is the Northerners, to a certain extent, were a little jealous of the Southerners. Like, okay, there's a little bit of a moral dilemma, but in the North, there's plenty of racism in the United States. There was plenty of white people that didn't hire black people. There was plenty of segregation. It was just a smarter segregation. It was, let's gerrymander and let's isolate black people in certain areas, but say they can live anywhere, but not set up a system or give them jobs or access to jobs that allow there to be a true segregation. But the racism still existed back then. So white business owners of the North were like, oh, this is economically unfair for us because the South has an advantage. They have hundreds to dozens to thousands of free laborers. And that was one of the essences of why there began to be this disruption where this isn't fair. And obviously the North at that time, or hopefully obviously, wasn't going to be like, we said no to slavery and now we're going to say yes to slavery. And Lincoln is actually quoted in a number of different times of his number one goal was keeping the Union together. And all of a sudden, slavery became a make or break point for the Union. So the Civil War and the freeing of slaves was almost the very end of the road. It was like, I want to keep the Union together is my number one priority. I don't want to go to war. I don't want a succession between the North and the South, the Union and the Confederacy, as we now call it. So it was less about slavery is wrong, and it's like, okay, this is now the thing that's going to divide us, and oh man, now we're going to have to go to war because of it. And so a war happened. Two halves of a country fought against each other, shooting guns at each other, shooting cannons at each other, taking over cities. Death. Why? Because one side said, I want to own people. I want to be able to think black people are inhuman, subhuman, and I want to own them. I want to own them so that I can profit off of their blood, sweat, and tears. And we can go all the way back into what it was like to be a slave. We can go back to a lot of different components of what it was like to have been captured in your homeland, to have been put in slave camps in Africa, to then take the trip over here, to have your culture beaten and stripped away from you, to turn you into somebody that could even be a slave. But to come to the point of which I believe it was February 1st, 1965 is when the actual 13th Amendment was created. And it took till December of that year, I believe it was December 6th of 1965, for actually 3/4 of the state to ratify it. So we go to war. The Southerners secede the war, the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the owning of people, the forced labor, of course, with the exception of if you break the law, which we're going to get into in a second. And from February 1st, it took till June 19th. So we're talking 5.5 months. And 5.5 months after the war was lost, it took 5.5 months, and it took the army that won the war to go all the way down to Texas to say, we demand, and it is now illegal for you to own slaves. So just think about that resistance. Think about the mindset and the entitlement and the gall of the South to not only think I can own another human being, I can dehumanize another human being, but then we're going to go to war for it. And then we're going to lose that war, and I'm still going to hold out for almost a half a year longer. And then Juneteenth happens. And then we look at the way things have shifted from them. Number one, they put the provision in the law that says if you've done something illegal, we can still bring you into forced labor or servitude, i.e. prison. But then from that point, we need to look at the mindset of people. The mindset of the people is there is a half of the United States that believes that they have been something has been taken from them that they have a right to have, the ownership of another human being. So just because it's illegal doesn't mean that you don't believe that it's okay. Let's take something on the complete flip side. Weed is now legal in the U.S. Weed is legal in California. There are many people that for many years did not give a fuck about that law. They were going to smoke their weed. So the fact that it's legal was just like, I'm just doing the exact same thing. And now maybe some more people go on board with that because, oh, it's not bad, it's not illegal, I don't need to buy it from a drug dealer or whatnot. Now let's flip it to the other side, to think of something that you believe is legal. Your whole life was legal, your parents thought it was legal, your grandparents thought it was legal, and somebody tells you that it's illegal. You're only going to stop doing that thing specifically to not get in trouble. But the mindset and the belief and the views that you have over that particular person or that group of people isn't going to change. And if it doesn't change from an adult, a parent or a grandparent perspective, they're going to instill those values in their children. Those children, unless something changes, will begin to instill them in their children, their children, and their children. And when we think about 1965 till 2023, we're talking about like great-grandmothers. So if your grandmother is still alive, there is a chance that her mother was alive during slavery, if you're older. For me, I look at the impact that it has on the people that were from the ownership class, i.e. white people in the United States, but then the view of what it's like to be on the other side, to be a slave. Harriet Tubman has this amazing line that says, I freed 10,000 slaves and I would have freed 10,000 more, except they didn't know they were a slave. And of course, that's a lot. And to think about what it was like to have been put into a position, taken away your humanity for so long that you actually have completely normalized being a slave. And of course, we can make a giant analogy to that of being a slave to the corporate world, being a slave to what is a mindset. But your freedom, your free will, your ability to be a human has been taken away so much that the idea of getting it back is like is like, oh, I'm not even a slave because I've now normalized servitude. I've normalized this life. So all of a sudden you're free. What do you do? Maybe the area that you're in, they don't even really recognize you as free, and the military has to be there to ensure that you stay free. And then a set of policies come into place, because while there's no more slavery, there was never an intention behind North or Southern lawmakers of making black people truly equal. And so in the South, Jim Crow laws came in because, again, everybody just wanted power. There was like, I want to get elected. I want to get reelected, which is basically the same thing that we're dealing with today in at least U.S. politics. We want to get reelected. So we need to align ourselves with the people and say the right things so that we don't get canceled, but we get reelected. And so to get reelected, at a certain point, they needed the South's support for certain reelection bids or campaigns to go more smoothly. And so they said, okay, we're going to withdraw the troops and let you monitor and manage this post-slavery world yourselves. And that's where Jim Crow comes in. That's where the segregated South came about, going through late 1800s, early 1900s. And it was, hey, we're basically paying people maybe a little bit, but maybe we're not doing all the worst things. But the laws of the Jim Crow South were just as harmful, or as close to harmful, as when black people were slaves. The lack of any true rights, and not even having the right to vote. So if you don't have the right to vote, anybody that is making laws doesn't care about you, because you're not going to impact in any way, shape, or form their ability to get reelected. And so then you really don't matter. So we can go over all the predatory practices of Jim Crow. We can go over segregation. We can go into the separate but equal, which was a semi-pivotal point in which we wanted to desegregate schools, Thurgood Marshall. And now we're almost 100 years later, the 60s, where we are now fighting, or 50, I think it was 54, was Brown versus the Board of Education, Topeka, where we're fighting and saying, hey, we deserve to be in equal schools. There is no such thing as separate but equal. This is separate and unequal. So 70 years later, white water fountains, colored water fountains, this segregated world. So even though a thing has happened, a Juneteenth has happened, an army came to free you, are you really free? Do you feel free? Do you feel empowered? Do you feel that you get to live this thing that people talk about, the American dream? And the answer is maybe, but the norm is a no. Now, there are many an opportunity. A greater opportunity happened 80 years later than in slavery. That is true. But to really look at what the mindset to truly believe that you can do anything, this idea of the American dream, was still not even a dream in so many African Americans or black people's lives. So then we fast forward. Okay, we've now desegregated schools. And then what happens? We still have so many predatory practices that exist, from how to get a home loan, to white supremacy organizations that exist, to the fact that there's just a giant underrepresentation in politics, in leadership, in business ownership. So the span of, at a bare minimum, having access to viewing somebody that looks like you in a position of power. So if nobody looks like you in a position of power, can you believe that you can be in a position of power? Now, there are the greats, but in a day and age in which, there was a great, we'll call him a Marcus Garvey. We then create splits and divisions within the group. There was a major split in divisions in the early 1900s, where there was kind of like the first civil rights movement happened, and Marcus Garvey is on one side and W.E.B. Du Bois is on the other side. And W.E.B. Du Bois was more of the Martin Luther King-like character in that day and age, of just being like, we all need to come together in love, and our white brothers and black brothers need to come together. And Marcus Garvey was like, yo, fuck that shit. Ain't no white person gonna take care of me. We need to all get our asses back to Africa and reunify Africa. And then, so we create a split. So trying to bring together what was split through slavery, through inequalities, through Jim Crow, we're trying to bring it back together. And then two characters, let's split them. And there's even all the evidence of literally FBI, federal agents going in and being like, the bigger we make this split, the less power that this movement will have. Therefore, the current establishment of power will stay. So we then continue to go on, and we continue to go on. And, I wonder at what point, if you're connected to your consciousness, you believe that you truly belong. For when I look at my life and I go one generation back, my dad. So my dad was born at a time in which marrying a white woman was illegal. So at birth and through the first few years of his life, the idea of falling in love and marrying a white woman was a thing that was illegal. So the love that my mother and father have when my dad and mom were born was a thing that was illegal. So that is something to already start. And then you think about it, you go a generation back, 2 generations back. And I stood in Bell City, Missouri, looking at a graveyard with my great-grandmother, and to look at the birth date of my great-grandmother and to realize that I'm looking at a human being that is my ancestor who was born in slavery. To know that her parents, grandparents, which are then great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, what was done to them to dehumanize them, how is it then undone? How is it undone that even after that slavery ended, generations later, there is still not an equality? To think about my mom's side of the family sending my grandfather, my mom's dad, to Europe to stop their wedding because my grandma didn't want her daughter marrying a black guy. So we're talking 45 years ago. So what is that, like 1970, 73? 73-ish, maybe they're married for 50 years. So less than 50 years ago, there was as a black person, I am not enough. I'm not enough to be accepted unconditionally by your family. So then we'll fast forward and we can talk about mass incarcerations. We can talk about the war on drugs, the United States pumping drugs into inner city environments to then fund wars other places. We're not going to get into the full conspiracy theory, but we can just look at a set of policies that took a marginalized group of people and kind of on the surface level gave them equality, freed them, but never enabled or fixed or put in purposes, put in projects. What word am I looking for? They never put in programs to truly take people out of the mindset of being a slave, to truly help those get in the mindset of, oh, this is a country of the free and the brave. Any man can do anything, that sort of a thing. So those traumas get passed on, even though there's now technically freedom. So we fast forward to today, and I look at my life, and I was born to a mother that was white and a father that was black, in a household in which race wasn't negatively or positively discussed. And I'm not to say I shouldn't say wasn't overly discussed, but stories are told. My dad would tell a story about when he was in high school and how they had just segregated high schools in Missouri. And by segregating the high school, the white basketball coach wouldn't let any of the black guys play. So they all quit. And luckily there was a principal that said, why did all of you quit? Coach is racist. And the principal comes and the principal says, all right, well, why don't we let your starters and them play? And my dad and his homies just mopped them up. So as a child, I know that, that was an experience of my dad. Oh, wow, that feeling of not belonging, not being allowed to do something that you love. And even if that hasn't actually happened to me yet, that's now a thing that like, oh man, if that happened to my dad, it can happen to me. When my dad would tell me about all the racist police officers and the time that he would get pulled over or put over to the side and all those different moments, I was just like, oh, that happened to him. So maybe that can happen to me. And then we live in a world in which when you are different and treated as different, you want and you yearn to belong. And to belong is not to say, hey, you can go now drink out of the same water fountains. You can now go to the same school. You can now apply for the same jobs. It is to feel that there's an active sense of inclusion. And sometimes that starts by seeing somebody that looks like you in doing the thing that you want to do, to know that, oh, I can dream of that thing because there's a person that looks like me, kind of, that's already doing that thing. Oh, I saw a black CEO. I saw a mixed race CEO, whatever you want to call it. Oh, now I know that this is a thing that I can even dream to do. For it takes the true innovators, the true special people in this world to not see themselves in a thing and be like, I fucking deserve that. I can do that even though it has not yet been done. And so this sense of belonging, or the fear of lack of belonging, or the always being different, is something that plagued me a lot of the times when I was growing up. And I had it was a double-edged sword for me, because on one side, I went to a very white school in a nice area called Carmel. It was my parents sacrificed so much of their life for my brother and I so we could get a good education. You never feel like you're there. And I think what was it, second grade, playing Foursquare was the first time that I got called a stupid little brown boy. And almost not even knowing that was racist, but just knowing that I was hurt. And all I wanted was to have blonde floppy hair and blue eyes like Kevin Merfeld. Nothing against Kevin, but that was it. He's like, he could do whatever he wanted to. All I remember is he never gets in trouble. And I was like, I wanted to put gel in my hair, and I wanted to have floppy hair because I just wanted to blend in. I wanted to look like everybody else. I remember when I was a kid, I used to listen to Korn and Blink 182 and Offspring, because that was what the cool kids in school were listening to. And then very shortly after, I got made fun of for listening to white boy music, and then I'm like Jay-Z, Nas, LL Cool J, NWA. My mom was funny; she'd never let us have parental advisory. So outside of the ones that I hid from her, like Will Smith, was never swore. So that was the one rap CD that didn't have parental advisory. Or I used to go to the warehouse when buying CDs were a thing. If you know about the warehouse, Tower Records, Rasputin, Bay Area. But I used to find the version of the CD that had the price tag over on top of the parental advisory to sneak it by my mom. But there was always this feeling of not belonging. So then I have to look and talk a certain way. And for me, it always came down to basketball. Basketball, I have representation. But basketball was also the way that I was able to prove myself that I was black enough in the black community. And then it was just how do you dress different, talk different when you're in the white community? And I remember being in high school and a kid on my football team, a sport that is dominated by black people. This kid on my football team at a Catholic high school in Salinas, California, looks at me and says, "What are you doing here? Niggers don't play football." And to just freeze, that nervous system that says fight or flight and goes so overwhelmed, you just sit there and your tail goes between your legs and you're silent. And realizing that all this thing, talking about equality, the end of what was this slavery thing 100 years plus ago, is sitting here in an unequal world. A world that has given massive opportunities to people of all races, but to realize that we still live in a space in which there is a division in which there is the essence of the entitlement of the slave owner that says, I am better than this. This person was allowed to be bought, and even though I can't buy them now, I have a mindset of I was allowed, and how that is passed down. And that is not to say at all right now that there is the slavery should be legal, but it is a mentality that says a thing that I once could own can never be equal to me. And the entitlement that comes along with, instead of me looking and not wanting to be on the bottom and lifting myself and building something myself, let's make it easier to push other people down. So when it comes to life, and the life that I live and attempt to be as connected as I can, my struggle to this day exists in the yearningness to belong. And that whole don't give a fuck what anybody else thinks is something that I work on. But at the end of the day, I do care what other people think. And because I care about what other people think in this space, I talk too much. I overcomplicate things because I yearn to kind of hit that, oh, is this the perfect argument where I can express my truth and not trigger you at the exact same time? Because this shit's about to get fucking uncomfortable. So when I look at the celebration of this thing that we call Juneteenth, there's a sadness. The sadness is a recognition of it took from February to June, an army marching to Texas to actually end a thing that we already went to war with and the war ended. And then there is a sadness to look at the fact that we have to have a massive celebration over something that should have never even been a thing in the first place, slavery. And then the last sadness is a thing about people that have a fucking problem with Juneteenth. And for a later episode, we are now creating this anti-woke culture that conservatives like to spew out, taking away what is the most beautiful concept that exists: to be awoken, to have your eyes open, to see a light that allows you to understand. But let's come back. Juneteenth represents a major thing. It represents a moment in which an army showed up to tell people that you have been given the right, at least at this moment, to be human, to not be inhuman, to not be 3/5 of a human. But Juneteenth represents an army showing up in Texas that says, all of you that were slaves are now free, and you are given the right to be the human being that you want to be. And yeah, 160 years later, that process, we're still fucking working on it. And yes, there is a greater opportunity for those of all races to be more human. But at the exact same time, there are many challenges that didn't exist then, or new versions of the same challenges, keeping us from being human, keeping us from feeling that we are unconditionally enough. Whether they're the systems that are in place, whether it is the institutions that are in place, whether it is the active racist people out there that do not believe that you are worthy. We are. I am. You are. And so I celebrate Juneteenth looking back at the history of what was, the continuation of that to this present moment, but what can be. And what can be is fucking beautiful and almost impossible to even conceptualize, because so much has to be undone. But the undoing of things starts with the doing of one thing: the doing of human beings, white and black, taking a stand and realizing the status quo is fucking broken. The current system isn't broken. The current system is operating phenomenally, but the current system is set up to allow those that have power to keep their power and get more power, and keep enough of a gap between them and everybody else so that they stay comfortable and we stay working. So connect to yourselves. Being the human being that you truly want to be empowers other people to be the human being that they want to be. And if we can get more human beings being human, then there's less bullshit and there's less of the remnants of all that was in today. So, happy Juneteenth. This is Chris Walker. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Being Human with Chris Walker.